Welcome to our lecture on ancient Roman and early Christian art, a continuation of Module 3, Art of the Ancient World. In about 500 BCE, the Roman Republic was established and would last about 4 centuries. But the ruling class would change. Sometimes it would be an emperor, sometimes it would be a group. It would change, but it started out as a republic. The Roman Empire reached into northern Italy and then Greece, Western Europe, northern Africa, and parts of the Near East. It became a huge and influential empire. Roman art combined native Italian styles with other artistic sources, such as Greece, hence the term Greco-Roman style. It was fashionable for Romans to own or have copies of Greek works of art in their homes. This tendency gave the Romans a reputation as imitators of art, which is really too simplistic. Roman art is very eclectic. There are paintings and sculptures. There also are master builders and are inventors of concrete. Because of the vast expanse of the empire, Roman-built structures can be seen all over their former empire, from England and France to northern Africa. The origin of the Roman Republic started with the expulsion of the last Etruscan king in 509 BCE. At first, it was under the care of 2 elected officials. Only after a series of constitutions in several hundred years did it actually become a republic where many men shared in governance. Art, architecture, and sculpture from the Roman Republic was influenced by Greek sculpture. When a military leader named Sulla returned from sacking Athens, he carted with him hundreds of Greek statues back to Rome. Many Romans had seen Greek art before, but these hundreds of statues that came all together really inspired and influenced them. Here we see 3 sculptural examples that are distinctly Roman. There was a long tradition of making lifelike marble sculptural bust portraits of heads. The patrons of these types of portrait busts had a taste for what's called verism, or hyperrealism, or stark realism. So in verism, the artist depicts even the smallest details on the surface of the skin and all its imperfections. So we get bone structure and musculature, but also wrinkles. Portrait busts grew out of an Italian custom from around the 2nd century BCE of making masks of deceased family ancestors. So they went from making masks to making portrait busts. People of the upper classes would parade with these masks and then later funerary busts at the funeral of a relative. So they would carry portrait statues of not just the recently deceased person, but other family members as well. And that's what's being depicted in the right, patrician carrying 2 portrait heads. So he's carrying 2 portrait busts of 2 ancestors at a funerary event to honor them. And the 2 heads are meant to look similar to show that kind of family resemblance. Both Greek and Roman sculpture was frequently made using marble. However, one big difference between Greek classical sculpture, like Spear Bearer depicted here on the right, and sculpture from the Roman Republic is that Greek sculpture, remember, is all about idealism, the ideal human body and all of its capabilities. By contrast, portrait busts like the one shown here, head of a Roman patrician, Cato the Elder, a Roman one, it's all about realism, not idealism. And the stark realism here is really typical of the time. And it's called head of a Roman patrician, and a patrician just means a member of one of the most prominent Roman families. So if you're a patrician, you're associated with wealth, status, and influence. The typical features of Roman portrait busts done in the verism style, like this one, they often depict older men because older men were the most prominent citizens. They often were depicted with furrowed brows in their forehead. lines along their nostrils, and just a lot of general emphasis of the signs of age, because that was meant to reflect the wisdom and the experience the men had in politics and culture. Roman portrait busts sum up the Roman admiration and respect for civic leaders and statesmen during the period of the Roman Republic. With the death of Julius Caesar, Rome entered its empire period under Augustus. And remember, we looked at the altar of Augustinian peace to mark the beginning of his peaceful rule. With the birth of an empire, there emerged a desire to glorify the power of Rome by erecting splendid buildings and civic monuments. To their conquered subjects, Roman conquerors did bring some benefits. So even if you were conquered by the Romans, what you got in return was urban planning, like roads, bridges, apartment buildings, gyms, public baths, theaters. So even in violent defeat of others, the Romans wanted to glorify their empire by great building projects in these newly conquered areas. And they built really impressive architectural constructions. Here we see the Pont du Gard in Nîmes, France, in southern France. It's an aqueduct. An aqueduct is a structure designed to carry water from a source point to somewhere else. This aqueduct carried water over 30 miles. As you can see, it's constructed of 3 levels of arches, and the Romans are known to love arches, which we'll see more of. The whole structure sloped gradually downward in order for gravity to carry the water to its destination. Of course, an aqueduct is functional, but the Romans definitely paid attention to design. The lower 2 tiers of wide arches anchor the weighty structure to the earth. It looks strong and stable. But if you look at the top, the quickened pace of several more arches really mimic the pace of the water moving quickly through that top layer. The Colosseum was built by an aristocratic Roman family called the Flavians between 70 and 80 CE. The Flavians were not patricians, they were plebeians. Plebeians just means common people, so they were from the common people and rose up. After a really unpopular ruler named Nero, the Flavian family took over Roman rule for the next 30 years. The place where they built the Colosseum was really symbolic. Nero, the unpopular ruler, had built his private gardens here. The private gardens were part of his elaborate, expensive, and really wasteful palace called the Golden House. So they got rid of that, and the Flavians turned this into a public space. So the message was surely not lost on the Roman people. The Colosseum was the grandest amphitheater anywhere, the first permanent one in Rome. What was its purpose? It was the setting for various types of entertainment for the general public. On the very spot where Nero, this tyrant, had lived only a few years earlier. So like I said, it was really symbolic. Building something like this for the general public was a way to get people on board with the new ruling family, the Flavians. Note the oval shape and seated stepped arrangement. This allowed for everyone to see what was happening in the center. Events like mock sea battles, gladiatorial games, and wild beast hunts were popular. The Colosseum could hold over 50,000 people. They were masters at crowd control. There were 80 exits, and the interior had lots of passageways and stairways to handle the large crowds. The structural system is, again, based on a series of arches. The arch gives the strength that is needed for such a large structure without making more bulk and weight. Even so, there were deep foundations to support the weight of the structure. Most of the interior was made of concrete, and limestone was used on the exterior. The audience would have been at least partially covered originally from the sun or rain by an awning strung over the huge space. It was probably canvas or some other temporary material like that. They have found holes to support the poles that would have held up this awning. The columns on the outside that hold up those arches are reminiscent of Greek architecture. The Doric order is the style of columns on the ground floor. Remember, the Doric order was used in the Parthenon. And the second floor is the more decorative Ionic, and the third Corinthian order. So the exterior is linked to the Greek architectural tradition, but the structure is completely Roman in terms of its use and its arches. In contrast to the Colosseum, which was a public space for entertainment, the Pantheon is a temple. It's a major temple, and it's dedicated to all the gods. Like the Colosseum, it is also a large architectural project. It was built under the Emperor Hadrian. Hadrian was much more interested in building public structures than in waging war. The Pantheon is one of the best preserved Roman buildings. One of the reasons it's so well preserved is that in the 7th century, it had been turned into a Christian church, so it had been really well cared for. If you look at the image of the front, above the columns is an inscription. And this inscription reads, Marcus Agrippus, son of Lucius, having been consul 3 times, built it. So Hadrian actually here doesn't give credit to himself. He gives credit to Agrippa. Agrippa was another ruler who had built a structure here originally. So it's an honorary inscription. Why would an emperor do this? Well, it associates him with past emperors and past power to give himself legitimacy. So if you look at the exterior, that entryway is called the porch. It's a rectangular shape, and it's supported by 16 columns made of granite. This reflects a Greek style. It's this classical rectangular porch. But the interior is round and has a dome. Look at the interior image. At the top of the dome is what is called an oculus. And an oculus is an opening that lets in light. It also helps with air circulation. In the Pantheon, the oculus is about 30 feet in diameter. So you first enter the building through this traditional rectangular porch, but then you walk into this enormous round structured space with the oculus and the dome. It is a temple, so it is meant to be like you're walking into another world. The support of the dome comes from the thick wall and these piers. 8 huge arches rest on the piers in the inside. Smaller arches help support the walls and are made of brick-faced concrete. And so that it doesn't collapse, the dome diminishes in thickness as it goes up toward the top. Look at the dome. You'll see these coffers. Coffers are interior patterns of squares that are recessed. So they lighten and strengthen the structure at the same time. Look at the decoration on the floor. It's really colorful slabs of marble alternating in shapes between circles and squares. So here we have the influence of a Greek temple with the rectangular porch on the outside and the columns. But this is definitely a Roman interior with the arches and a dome.